But if you're a leader that listens first and speaks last, as Simon Sinek has often talked about lately, you really do get a chance to hear these ideas. And if you're open-minded about them, your outcomes are going to be stronger because of that conversation and that opportunity to have people equally contribute to the conversation. To do that well, you actually have to embrace diversity. You have to recruit diversity. You have to speak diversity, equity, and inclusion in your language, in your actions, in your marketing. And you have to prove that it's not just talking the talk, that it's walking the walk.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin? And how do you develop the mindset and skill set to be successful? Welcome, everyone, to the Sprint to Success with Design Thinking podcast. I'm your host, Saba Kidwai. Join me each week as I share the stories and strategies from the world's leading researchers and practitioners about why they believe the answer lies in practicing design thinking. When I think about what it means to be a leader in the fourth industrial revolution, or as Eric Brynjolfsson called it in a couple episodes ago, the second machine age, my favorite definition comes from David Notgrass. He says transformational leaders are those who encourage creativity, recognize accomplishments, build trust, and inspire a collective vision. They are role models, he says, for the beliefs and values they want to see others adopt, and they believe that their audience is able to rise to the occasion. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to one such leader who taught me what it meant to be a leader, Dr. Kevin Lohenry. He is a clinical professor of family medicine, director of the primary care physician assistant program at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California, which is ranked number 1 in California and top 10 nationally. He's also the associate dean for graduate affairs at the university. In 2014, I had the pleasure of being the director of innovative learning and worked under Kevin, where I was able to learn so much. What I believe truly allows Kevin to excel and grow as a transformational leader is his deep belief in advocacy, both for yourself and for others in your care. Advocacy was a word that was heard often in the program and seen in action almost every single day. And it always left me feeling, why was this not something that I had heard more of? Why is this not something that was part of my educational experience? This is a conversation that I've wanted to record for a long time, as the PA profession is one I believe the education profession and many other industries can learn a lot from. The PA profession is relatively new. However, year after year, it's ranked as the number 1 best overall job. These rankings from the U.S. News & World Report take into account things like work-life balance, salary, and growth potential. If there's one thing I learned from my time with the program, it's that advances are possible when we combine leadership with advocacy, both for ourselves, our professions, and our communities. Advocacy is something I've been thinking a lot about over the past year. In a culture where we often feel as if we have to ask for permission, where we don't always feel as if we have the freedom and autonomy to try new ideas, or sometimes even ask questions, understanding how to advocate for yourself and others is critical. This month, Kevin celebrates 10 years at the University of Southern California, and so we begin by going back in time as I ask Kevin to share how he came to learn about the PA profession to begin with and how his career has evolved since then.
So I was actually stationed in the Navy at a base in Boston area, basically. And as the first time I ever met a PA, there was a PA there that was working at a small branch clinic at this Naval Air Station in South Weymouth, Massachusetts. I had no idea what PAs were. And there was something about him in the way he took care of patients culturally, the way he had this ability to relate to the average patient, that it just seemed to be a little different than the physicians that I worked with at that same clinic. And so it was attractive to me because I was looking for a career. I was serving as a Navy corpsman at the time. And there was just something that was so intriguing about it that I felt like I would continue to pursue it. I ended up staying in the Navy for another 5 or 6 years doing search and rescue as a rescue swimmer for the Navy. But that PA concept never left my brain. He had planted the seed that continued to, germinate over time and grow in my brain that led me to want to do this. And when I got out of the Navy it would have been 1993, I basically went on that track towards becoming a physician assistant and graduated in 1996 and then practiced in the western suburbs of Chicago as an internal medicine PA, working at a hospital. I did hospital work for our internal medicine group and basically saw patients every morning in the hospital, rounded on them, did history and physicals for any patient we admitted, would make sure that there were daily notes and orders for the patients, things of that nature. And then I would go see our patients in an outpatient setting over at our clinic the rest of the day. And it also gave me the opportunity to work with older Americans in long-term care facilities. Usually once a month, we'd go and visit our patients in those facilities. And it was a really rich experience for a brand new PA in this profession.
One of the themes you'll hear throughout this episode is Kevin's gift for seeing and thinking about ideas before they became trends. The first one being the importance of work-life balance. I asked Kevin how and why he decided to make the transition to education.
So it's kind of a long-winded story, but essentially I had this Kairos moment when I was coaching my son's basketball team. He was 4 or 5 years old at the time. I was on call at the hospital and I was trying to coach a game while I was getting paged from the hospital about patients left and right. And I just realized that this was not what I wanted to do long term, that I really wanted to be able to spend more time with my family and have a little bit more balance in life. And this was a long time ago, before that kind of work-life balance became hip and cool. I just felt like I didn't want to wait too long to see my kids grow up without a father's presence around them. And so at the time, I had been lecturing at a local university at my alma mater, Midwestern University in the western suburbs of Chicago. And I got the opportunity to work one day a week as a faculty member and truly thought I would be bored to death doing teaching for, a day a week. And I still practiced 4 days a week. But I fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with the opportunity to impart knowledge and to work with students and see the light go on in their heads related to concepts. And frankly, I've learned more from my students than I've taught them myself. And it's just such a rich experience. And that led to a full-time academic career, which led to initially an associate director role at a PA program, and then a director role at a PA program in Arizona. And at that point, I realized I needed to work on my PhD if I wanted to move up in academia. So I ended up getting a PhD in higher ed leadership. And as soon as I finished my PhD in October of 2010, I received a letter from the dean of the medical school at the Keck School of Medicine of USC, and they were seeking a new leader for their program. And my wife and I had this kind of discussion about where we're going to go in the future. And there was an opportunity for leadership at the university I was at, but it would have meant giving up teaching and being a director. And I wasn't ready to do that yet. And so I ended up applying for the job at USC. I fell in love with the culture and the commitment to diversity and inclusion at USC that I hadn't really experienced at the same level at my previous institution, and ended up taking that position and have been fortunate to have done that for the rest of my career. I've been there 10 years next month.
Kevin highlights one of the reasons he chose the University of Southern California was for their commitment to diversity and inclusion. As I mentioned earlier, one of the primary ways I saw this practiced was through advocacy, something that's deeply embedded within the PA profession and is responsible probably for its incredible growth over the years. As Kevin mentioned, when he first began his career as a physician assistant, there were only 29,000 PAs in the United States. Fast forward to today, and he says there are over 135,000 in the United States and in other countries. The way in which the profession thinks and teaches advocacy is probably one of the reasons why it has made the advances it has over the past years. I asked Kevin what advocacy means to him and why he believes this is an important part of the educational experience for students as well.
I think advocacy in a nutshell is teaching. I think it is synonymous with teaching. You're getting an opportunity to educate somebody about your perspective on an issue or topic that's you're passionate about. And so it is so critical, especially if you think about the classic role of advocacy, when you're talking about influencing our leaders in government or our leaders in state government or leaders in health systems on things that are important to you to try to impact the outcomes of your patients or your students. And then, so many of them don't have any experience in healthcare or in higher education. And so at the root of advocacy is just educating them about what you do and what the challenges are that you face, that you're trying to mitigate through some sort of legislative process or financial investment. I think if you look back to the inception of the profession, we started in the 1960s from at Duke University from a Dr. Eugene Stead, who saw that there was a shortage of healthcare providers and physicians, and particularly, and he remembered from his training the fast tracking of physicians from World War II that had occurred based on the shortage of physicians in the global theater of combat for the war. And they had set up a fast tracking for physicians at that point. So he set up this PA profession in a similar light. And essentially, we grew out of that to when I graduated, fast forward to 1996, there were only 29,000 PAs practicing in the United States. And now we have over 135,000 certified PAs practicing in the United States and in other countries. And so we recognize that while we're still young as a profession, it's just over 50 years, we are growing exponentially to meet the needs of our world related to healthcare. And so much of that growth has been related to advocacy because we had to educate legislative leaders, both at the national level and at the state level, to help impact the laws that govern our practice and our ability to practice as part of a team in medicine, our laws in terms of what we can provide for our patients. So from the healthcare side of my house, advocacy has been about growing the profession, the scope of practice to meet our kind of level of training to the highest levels of our training so that we can provide the best care possible for our patients. If you take the educational side of my brain, which is the other half, then that advocacy is really about how do we support our students who are needing to get into this pipeline of service and practice and into the profession, but yet there are so many barriers for students from so many different backgrounds to be able to get into higher education and then into graduate school. And so a lot of what we do is in terms of trying to incentivize the legislators from an advocacy perspective to see the big picture of how investing in this profession through the students and through the educational programs ultimately pays a dividend for their constituents in their communities through the kind of excellence in healthcare that they receive.
I'm fascinated by how the PA profession has been able to advance over the years, and Kevin shares a key lesson that we can all learn from in our industries. That's that educating others is advocacy work, especially legislators. And when doing so, he says, we must be grounded in why. In his case, providing the best possible care to patients. Each year, the program takes the students on an advocacy field trip. I asked Kevin to share more about this experience and how the students learn about and engage in advocacy work during this trip.
Yes, as you may recall from your time with us, we typically, in a non-pandemic world, we do a advocacy trip to Washington, D.C. every spring break. And that started just over 9 years ago with a conversation with Representative Karen Bass, who is the representative for Culver City in that district, surrounding district in Los Angeles. And Representative Bass happens to be a PA. She's the only PA in Congress. She also happens to be a former faculty member that worked in our program. So we have a very good relationship with her. And she graciously offered to support our efforts in terms of helping our students engage in leadership and advocacy at a national level. And so that very first trip, we took out with us about 18 students who voluntarily spent their spring break with us in Washington, D.C., learning from our professional academy and our educational association how to do advocacy for the profession and for patients and for communities. But also, we had the opportunity to learn from Congresswoman Bass and her staff. The students received a tour, and then we had a Hill Day where they actually went and advocated for specific bills. And that trip started out at that point in time, and the most recent one that we took was in 2019, prior to the pandemic, where we brought 42 students from the first year class that went with us on that trip. And we are now engaging with other PA schools around the country. There were 5 schools that were represented at that training, and more on the way. So it's really kind of a growing experience, not just for our program, but for others in the country.
Kevin shares a proud Trojan moment as Congresswoman Karen Bass is the only PA in Congress and is also a former faculty member at the University of Southern California's Primary Care Physician Assistant Program. Throughout the conversation with Kevin, I admire his leadership and how he builds bridges of collaboration through the relationships he has and the experiences he wants to bring to others. You'll often hear me say that cultures of innovation begin with a culture of empathy, and it was through watching and learning from Kevin and my time at the PA program that this became a belief that would form the foundation for all the work I do moving forward and today. At its core, advocacy comes from a deep understanding of other people's needs and from a desire to create a better world. At a time where so often we hear everyone say, we don't want to go back to normal, we want to go back to better. I asked Kevin to share why he believes there is a strong relationship that we must adopt between leadership and advocacy.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, so much of leadership is the team that surrounds you. And so, most of the ideas that we develop to, for example, the advocacy trip and things of that nature, really come from the conversations that we're having among ourselves as faculty, staff, and students. I think most of the leadership experts talk about the importance of listening and to intently listen before you speak. So often as leaders, people look to you for the answers, but the answers are among everybody. And really, the easiest part about being a leader is supporting somebody else's ideas and seeing it come to fruition and be successful. In the instance of kind of that role between leadership and advocacy, really leadership is about finding an idea, or finding a team that has an idea, and then connecting the dots related to how do we make that idea become alive and well. And so advocacy it starts actually at the local level, educating each of us as to what that issue is and what are the barriers to us actually achieving that goal. Then that education or advocacy goes to the leadership of your department or your division or your school of medicine or your university or your health system, et cetera, and helping the leadership understand the importance of this and why they should value this too. And then it kind of transitions from educating the local people to educating the people that you're trying to seek both insight and wisdom from and investments from towards that project that you're doing. If I may, I'd love to give you one example that we have alive and well that's really a big shining light for us right now, and that's our street medicine program. So, many years ago as a PA, I worked in a homeless shelter. And I had the opportunity to actually engage our students in that shelter, caring for our neighbors who experienced homelessness on the streets of, at that time, Aurora, Illinois. It was a place called Hesed House, and it was just a wonderful place that cared with love and compassion for those that were struggling with homelessness. And ironically, several of the individuals that went through that program ultimately ended up leading street medicine programs in other parts of the country, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, for example. And so a few years later, as I'm in a leadership role, I have an opportunity to re-engage with those two individuals who had done such great work in that community. And this idea came on as to why are we not doing this in Los Angeles County, which at the time had over 54,000 people that experienced chronic homelessness on the streets of our cities and communities. And so advocacy became, how do we engage financially the university to support this idea that we could be a solution to providing primary care services to those individuals who are out on the streets. We ultimately convinced the leadership of our department to support this. And ironically, the department chair, Dr. Laura Mosqueda, was appointed dean of the Keck School of Medicine. And so she became in this place of higher power and higher influence, and had an opportunity to even support this in a greater way, which resulted in us recruiting these two experts to come into Los Angeles County to start our street medicine program. And since that time, this April will be the third year of its existence. We've built more teams that are going out and caring for those patients on the streets, but we're also engaging in the leadership, the advocacy work, the education work, and also the research. Being a major university, we have that opportunity to really impact that in a much greater way, which is really the beauty of that initial idea. It has blossomed into this beautiful flower that is extending to so many different areas of our communities, and absolutely making an impact. I'll give you just a quick little data series on that. In Los Angeles County, the readmission rate for hospitalizations at the time we started the program was typically around 60%. So somebody experiencing chronic homelessness would have a 60% chance of returning to the emergency department within 1 month, 30 days, based on the condition they're discharged from the hospital. That number is now 11% for the people that we engage with. So this has significant quality of life outcomes for those patients, because they're not having to be shuffled back and forth to the hospitals, but it also has significant cost savings for the health system and our country as well. And that's when advocacy and leadership really come together perfectly.
As I mentioned before, at a time where many of us are looking to build back better and advance new ideas, Kevin's advice is to listen, learn, and collaborate with diverse voices. As Kevin shares, leadership is advocacy, and at its core, he says advocacy is about educating each other. His example of the street medicine program is a brilliant one of what happens when leadership and advocacy intersect. It's also a reminder about the importance of connecting and working with our local community organizations, from businesses to academic institutions. Change happens when we begin to look around us, examine our challenges, collaborate with others, and collectively design and iterate upon solutions. Kevin is perhaps one of the most visionary leaders I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with. When I first met Kevin in 2013, he was thinking about the role of digital technologies in preparing the students in his program for the future. He created the role Director of Innovative Learning for me so that his faculty, the program, and the students would be able to be ahead of the curve. This is an investment that's paid dividends during the pandemic, before, and I'm sure for many years to come. That's not the only issue, though, Kevin was thinking about. Throughout my time with him, he was constantly thinking about diversity and inclusion, a core value that he shares with the University of Southern California's community. From pipeline programs to diversification of teams, to how ideas are advanced, to grants that were available to increase equity for students, he was leaning into this work before it became a trending topic in 2020. I asked Kevin to share why this was on his radar as an important area to focus in on, and why he believes so deeply in this work.
Why it's on my radar before others was just luck. I think it was timing. I've often been surrounded by like-minded people. I have the military experience, which gave me exposure to a lot of diversity from many cultures around the world. But at that age in my life, I didn't quite appreciate it for what it really was worth. I enjoyed it. It was intriguing to me, but it just didn't have the depth that it has now. When I started to think about diversity, when I was leading the Physician Assistant Education Association, I was actually on their board of directors, and I was president of the organization in 2011. And we had some really meaningful conversations, not only with our board and many of our constituents or members, but also with some of the leading diversity experts in the country at that time, including a Dr. Mark Neve, who at the time was the chief diversity officer for the AAMC, which represents all the medical schools in North America. And it really hit home for me, this argument about diversity equals excellence. I don't think I ever fully understood that until I really started to read into what Mark and others were writing about at that time. And that opened up my eyes to my own experiences with our students and our team that was very diverse at USC when I arrived there. And I can just tell you from my own personal experience, that simple formula of D equals E, diversity equals excellence, has come true for me in every situation. So the more diverse the group is around the table, the better our outcomes are going to be related to the decisions that we're making, because they're being informed from a wide variety of perspectives, particularly if, as a leader, you are allowing them to come to fruition. If you're a leader who speaks first and listens second, you're never going to hear the incredible ideas that can come from your team based on their own journeys and pathways that they've experienced in their lives. But if you're a leader that and I'm working at it, I'm not perfect, but if you're a leader that listens first and speaks last, as Simon Sinek has often talked about lately, you really do get a chance to hear these ideas. And if you're open-minded about them, your outcomes are going to be stronger because of that conversation and that opportunity to have people equally contribute to the conversation. To do that well, you actually have to embrace diversity, you have to recruit diversity, you have to speak diversity, equity, and inclusion in your language, in your actions, in your marketing, and you have to prove that it's not just talking the talk, that it's walking the walk. And I think anybody in the right mind who comes from my background, who says, I totally get this, I know what it's all about, is not there yet. Because even just an hour ago, I was in a meeting with a diverse group of my colleagues, and I had one of those aha moments that I often get from one of my colleagues who had read something in a different way than I had, and it brought light to a situation that was really important. So it's been a process. It's still a process, and it takes investment of my time to continue to learn. But I can just tell you from a personal perspective, I have never loved a job in my entire career more than I do now. And I really do put most of that on the diversity of my experiences among my team, my students, my staff.
While Kevin would like us to believe that everything was about luck, my time with him tells me otherwise. Kevin practices empathy on such a deep level in everything he does. As he mentioned earlier, his key advice for leaders was the importance of listening. And I've also shared that it was my time at the program in redesigning learning through the use of technology to create new opportunities and experiences that I came to learn that at its core, cultures of innovation begin with a culture of empathy. I love how explicit Kevin is in sharing that if we want outcomes that are going to allow us to thrive in today's world, we must embrace diversity. We have to recruit for diversity, he says. Speak diversity, equity, and inclusion in our language, in our actions, in our marketing. And we must prove, he says, that we are walking the walk. As higher education institutions across the country struggle to adapt to remote learning, Kevin and his faculty and his students were well prepared. I asked Kevin to share what this transition has been like and what he's learned through this experience, and how leaders can identify trends and build teams as they prepare for the future.
Wow. Well, so I would say, number one, it sounds much better than it is. I think it's from a perspective, it sounds more glorious than it was. I think the simple answer is there was a problem that I was trying to solve related to our educational program that involved the need for more technology. And that problem was, is I saw that electronic medical records were becoming very important in our outcomes for our students. And in fact, so many programs in the United States, PA programs, medical school programs, nurse practitioner programs, they're struggling for partners to work with their students to help them train the next generation of healthcare providers. And one of those challenges at that time, and this was right around 2012, 2013, was that the health systems were maneuvering towards electronic health records, but the students weren't trained in how to use EMRs or EHRs. And so I started working with a local partner to see if we could develop a electronic health record that we could incorporate into our educational program so that students could use case-based experiences through the concept of the electronic health record, and that we as a program could actually push out sample cases, laboratory findings, radiology findings that would help them kind of follow the typical progression of some of the topics and diseases that we talk about. that ultimately led to a greater discovery that we as a program needed to join the digital revolution. And that's when we found you. So we were so fortunate because when we first advertised for this position, it was just dumb luck because we were looking for a digital technology expert that could help us manage some of the technological innovations that we needed, but also could, kind of guide us as a Sherpa, if you will, through this kind of new age of doing teaching. And the universe is really good at giving people what they need if you're really open to it. And as you know, but your audience may not know, your sister was an incredible student with our program, graduated in the class of 2014, as I recall. And so we had that connection from Sadia to you that allowed us to think about things in a different way. You were already proficient as a tech person, but you have an educator's heart, you have the educator's mind, and so you were able to come in and translate for us all the things that we could be doing, and it just kind of blew up into this whole new opportunity for us related to digital technology. Honestly, so much of leadership is surrounding yourselves with people that are smarter than yourself, and that has been one of my gifts. Is that it's not that hard to find people that are smarter than me, and I have to embrace it, right? So that I can get people around me that can give me these ideas to support and advocate for that become reality. To the concept of the pandemic that you brought up, we were using Zoom about a year before the pandemic hit for meetings because we recognized that not everybody could make the meetings because they're out on the road seeing sites, visiting students. And so we wanted to try to mitigate that and keep people included in all of our discussions. So we were ahead of the curve on Zoom because of just happenstance. And then many of the other technology things that we've added in the curriculum and our ability to quickly navigate or pivot to teaching from home was really a credit to you and the work that you did because you empowered this group of faculty that became digital innovators. And for the last 3 to 4 years, they've led this digital conversation in the classroom for our education association. And so we already had our faith in them to kind of follow their lead when we had to shift gears last March. And I will forever be grateful to you for that influence that you had when you were with us for those 3 to 4 years.
I love how Kevin highlights, I was trying to solve a problem. It's something you hear him say often. This wasn't happenstance or luck. This was somebody truly leaning into the empathy work, identifying the needs of people, the needs for autonomy, choice, flexibility, and respecting and acknowledging that these were things that were important to the people around him. This is why design thinking practices empower us with the mindset and skill set to thrive in today's world. It keeps us in a beginner's mindset. Kevin reminds me of a quote from Shunryu Suzuki, where he says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Kevin's beginner's mindset, his humility, and his gift for listening leaves me in awe, and it's something that I continuously strive to develop in myself as a leader. I'm always curious about where and how people are learning, so I asked Kevin, where and who is he learning from?
Well, when I have time, so I'm often in the car, and LA traffic is notoriously bad, and so podcasts. I love to listen to podcasts, and I really do like to listen to a variety of perspectives when it comes to that. But I also love to read, and so I try to pick up several books a year, that I really deeply dive into, and they have absolutely impacted where we go. For example, Simon Sinek and It Starts with the Why was something we did at a retreat shortly after you left that ultimately our language totally changed because we recognized that we all had a collective why together that we shared as to why we were at the institution at that time and place. And there's so many others right now, certainly diving into more of the diversity work that's out there. We have book clubs at the Keck School of Medicine that are looking at a variety of things, trying to get better at our diversity work that we're doing in medicine as well. I think my challenge is there's so much to learn and just so many other things that kind of occupy my mind that you really have to be mindful of taking time every day to read something, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes. Dr. Stephen Sample, who is the former president of USC, wrote in his book, The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership, how he, as a president of a major university, would always take at least 20 to 25 minutes a day to just read something, often the classics. So sometimes I'll go back and read some of the classics as well, but ultimately it's about being mindful of learning and having an attitude of consistently seeking new knowledge.
Audio has definitely become many of our favorite ways to learn. I also appreciate how Kevin highlights the importance of bite-sized experiences when we think about learning. Setting aside just 10 to 15 minutes a day can compound over time. As someone who was relatively prepared for the issues that would arise in 2020, I asked Kevin what is top of mind for him as he thinks about the program, the profession, and the world. What is he thinking about and preparing for in the next 5 years and beyond?
Yeah, boy, I wish I could give you the magic formula, but I will say that our team is looking deeply, as all teams should be, in my opinion. What are the good things out of the pandemic that we can take and move forward to really change? You know this better than anybody. It's these kind of crises that really give us the greatest pivots in life for change, because we're forced to actually change. I want to give a little bit of credit to Yale University. They started a online PA school about 4 years ago, so they were way ahead of the curve for everybody else. Jim Van Ree, who was their program director, had nailed this idea. And honestly, as most innovators have experienced, people thought he was crazy. But in fact, he was well positioned compared to us. And so, I wonder what Jim's thinking about this next 5 years myself. We are absolutely going to embrace digital technology in delivering education. Given the environmental challenges that we have in Los Angeles, I think having our students learn from home a few days a week makes great sense. But we also want to acknowledge that there's so much that learning that happens in community when we're together, that when it is safe to be together, we're going to be together as well and be very mindful of that time that we have. I think we're also much better as a community in understanding the need for work-life balance. It is so critically important to recruit the very best and brightest, that you are walking the walk when it comes to that as well. And that's the thing that we're struggling with, because we're catching up from the pandemic and how to deliver everything online. But I think we're getting really proficient at it, and it will pay dividends for us down the road. Beyond that, I think the biggest thing, Saba, is how do we help those that don't have access to the resources like we do? As PAs, we make a very good living. As PA students, they're on their track to a six-figure salary when they graduate, which is a wonderful opportunity for many. And in some communities, that actually empowers an entire family to rise out of poverty when they're able to do that. So how do we actually empower communities of color, communities that come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, to be able to catch up to the rest of us, so that we can see the diversity really impact the outcomes of health disparities across this nation and this world? And so to me, in 5 years, I hope that we have a much better outcome when it comes to that, and equality and respect, and all the things that we've been lacking so much in the last few years, to try to impact the world, to make our lives a better day, make our whys make more difference in the world in terms of the impact that we're making in our work.
What did we learn from 2020? What do we want to take forward, and what do we want to leave behind? That's a question that Kevin believes all teams should be asking each other. So send us an email, tag us in your stories, or share a tweet letting us know what you learned, what you want to take forward, and what you want to leave behind from 2020. As our conversation comes to a close, I'm energized by Kevin's optimism, his reflective nature, and his enthusiasm. I asked Kevin, at a time when it's easy to feel stressed and overwhelmed, and when we face the danger of going back to what was comfortable, what fuels his energy and optimism for designing for the future?
Well, I think the truth is you have to embrace the bright stars that come into your lives. As a leader, you have to be open to new ideas. You have to be excited about new ideas, and you also have to be flexible. because those new ideas and the people that bring them don't always fit into a certain, kind of cutout, right? And so you're just a great example of that. I have many examples of the members of our team. But most importantly, you also have to acknowledge that sometimes the universe gives you the fortune of having somebody in your life for a period of time. We don't know how long that will be with every person, but we just have to make the best of every moment that we do have, because you also want to see people grow, and people like you who have just done that so extraordinarily in your life are a key example of what kind of leadership can be about. I get a lot of joy, not a lot of joy out of social media, but I get a lot of joy out of following the people that have been in my life over the years, related to what they've gone on to do and become and be passionate about. And I just want to thank you for giving us the gift of your brain, your energy, enthusiasm for the 3 years that we had you, and wish you the very best.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was the best 3 years of my life. I've got to ask you, one last question based off of what you said. Kevin, what keeps you excited and enthusiastic about new ideas during a time like this? Because I think a lot of people are struggling with that.
Yeah, I think the reality is this has been somewhat of a phased experience. I think in March, when this first hit, at least in Los Angeles County, when it first came about, we all had fear, tremendous fear of the unknown. And there was so little that we understood about this virus and its impact on us as a world. Then fast forward a couple months later, and we're dealing with it, and we're managing it, and we're doing it from home in a whole new way. But we're still kind of waiting to see where this is going, and such, terrible outcomes had occurred throughout the world related to the number of people who have been sick and died from this horrific disease. Fast forward even now, and now we're in kind of a comfort zone of, I can do this, I can work from anywhere, and still manage my job really well. And so I think just in the last few months, I felt like my brain has the bandwidth to start to think about new things and really reflect on new ideas a little bit more than I had maybe at the beginning of this. So I anticipate that all of us are going to start to really come back to some sense of normality. And I think the real question is, what does that normal look like? Because I don't want it to look like what it was like before the pandemic. I want to have grown from this tragedy and to honor those that have suffered from this tragedy by making the world a better place through the work and actions that we have the opportunity to influence and advocate for in our day-to-day work.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you still have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Sprint to Success with Design Thinking community.